My name is Jarrett Heintz. I'm going to take you through about an hour of a webinar on social engineering here momentarily, but I want to kick off by, of course, apologizing. It is fully on me that we are getting off on a late start here this morning/afternoon, depending upon where you are in the world. So my tremendous apologies for keeping you waiting, and I do apologize we had to start on the half hour instead of on the hour, but here we are. So rather than elongating things any further, let's go ahead and get into it. This morning/afternoon, again, I know some folks are coming to us from the East Coast, some coming from the West Coast, so depending upon where you are, welcome. We are going to talk quite a bit here today in the next hour about why social engineering is as large a problem and predominantly why we are, as organizations, so compelled to respond appropriately to social engineering attacks, given the not only profound damage they can render, but that they are basically ubiquitous because the source is people, and people are everywhere and involved in virtually every facet of every organization. So that's the pitch, that's the problem, and the solutions that we need to identify are often more subtle and in some cases a little unnerving. So we're going to get into it. I am just wanting to let everybody know in terms of the delivery system here today that the Zoom delivery that I do provide here is intended to be an appropriate balance of audio and video. And on occasion, the way that Zoom routes that traffic, it can degrade it, can make it to where the audio and video can fall out of sync, which can be kind of an irritant. So just FYI, if there are any extreme quality issues that happen to arise that I can't see on my end, but you can on yours, you're more than welcome to reach out, let me know, shoot me a message through chat, whatever is convenient, so that, again, we can try to get it corrected or righted as we go. Otherwise, feel free to chime in with questions at any time, although I will also make some space and some time for you to ask any additional questions at the end. I'm going to slip into the corner down here and ghost a little bit over the top of this stuff as we go, so I'll still be here. And again, if any point in time things on screen are difficult to discern or you'd like to elaborate on it, please don't be shy. Fundamentally, social engineering is a human problem with a human solution. Very rarely does social engineering end up being adequately addressed by technology. And in fact, that's one of the first and most thematic pieces of this discussion that I really want to emphasize. Human problems mostly warrant human solutions. And social engineering is considered one of the most significant problems to modern InfoSec in general. This isn't just a problem with phishing emails. This isn't just a problem with ransomware. This kind of goes to the core of what we're doing in an organization and how we defend it successfully. You know, most vendors identify some version of the following three components as part of managing and overseeing information security. You've got your technology, you've got the processes you engage in with that technology, and you've got the people who utilize all that stuff. So the technology doesn't get employed and the processes don't get utilized unless there are people that operate either as the catalyst for those things to occur or are actively engaged in those processes using that tech day in, day out. So if they are susceptible to being tricked or manipulated or frightened into a behavior that endangers the organization, we can take existing risk, maybe even risk that was already being realized in some form, and we can exacerbate it, or we can highlight it and bring other bad actors to the table who will see that there are weaknesses and vulnerabilities that others have successfully taken advantage of, and they'll attempt to repeat it. So this isn't just a siloed problem. It's not a one-off. This speaks to the very nature of architecting information security successfully. So let's get into it. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to start off by understanding what social engineering looks like. It's a pretty big umbrella, social engineering. There's lots to it, and there's lots of ways that it can manifest. It can be looking in, eyeball to eyeball, talking to a human being who is attempting to manipulate you. Sometimes it's electronic information, and sometimes it's even through mis and disinformation that social engineering can result. So there can be an individual message that we're worried about, but there can also be, in a more subtle context, an underlying social engineering approach to chip away at a sense of safety, security, or sometimes the opposite, to provide a sense of safety and security, what the famous cryptographer Bruce Schneier periodically refers to as security theater. Things that we do that kind of make it feel like we're safe or look safe, but aren't really all that safe. We're going to talk about some of the most typical methods for delivering these attacks, common types of attacks, and we're going to look at some ways that you can try to offset these attempts at harming you. And as I said, at the end, we'll take the last 10 or 15 minutes for any questions that you might have or anything else you'd like to elaborate on that maybe we didn't fully touch on during the presentation. Social engineering is manipulation fundamentally. Now, it might be manipulation through flattery, fear, anxiety, urgency. It could be manipulation through trickery, getting you to act or respond or to provide or not to provide. Maybe don't go in, maybe don't do that thing. And whatever the case may be regarding the delivery, the vector of social engineering, the outcome is usually a person making a choice or responding in a way they shouldn't. So the fundamental offsetting of social engineering is teaching humans what it looks like when they're being manipulated, when they're being exploited, and how to make sure that given that information, they can identify circumstances that endanger them and identify not just, hey, I know that people might try to manipulate me, so I should look out for that, but rather specific methods and specific vectors. And I say this very humbly. Not a year goes by when a hacker conference doesn't release some version of a social engineering attack that they're demonstrating at the conference that I don't look at and go, I would have fallen for that. They'd have gotten me with that one. So we're not talking about just that email from the Nigerian prince asking you for money, right? We know, and most people know, that that's a scam. It's the stuff that's even more insidious and in some cases tailored to us specifically that we've really got to be worried about. Not to mention the fact that this is not a problem that's going away. Complications in technology are only going to intensify with time. We're going to see things get more difficult, more abstracted, more complex. Abstraction and complexity mean that we're getting lost in the noise and that we might not be able to see the underlying thing that's trying to harm us in the first place. So this is an ongoing problem because humans are human beings. And our ability to inculcate a sense of urgency and importance regarding security is often what shifts their expectations and, to a lesser extent, as we'll talk about regarding incident response, their perceptions that turn them from a potential insider threat into a fantastic detective and defensive asset. It's hard to overstate the amount of damage, especially in dollars, but not just in dollars, that social engineering attacks often bring about. There is no longer a speculation that social engineering attacks could harm us. We've seen the realized damage, and it's not just inconvenience. It's not just lost access to an asset here and there. In some cases, the real world impact is financially devastating, and it can obviously expose intellectual property. It can obviously expose internal communication that might alter the reputation of an organization and disrupt its ability to function. And of course, this is what we would normally focus on because in most scenarios, information security facilitates the organization rather than operating as a focal point or a reason for the organization. Unless, of course, you're providing information security services, InfoSec is rarely the goal, rather it's a means to an end. So we also have to acknowledge that it's not just dollars and interruption to data and confidentiality, but rather if one of your, say, nurses at the hospital clicks on a link, again, it's easy to do. They're getting better and better at making it harder and harder to detect proactively all the time. And even well-trained employees might still fall for it. It's easy to do. Even InfoSec professionals click on links and make duh moments out of their day and go, oh, yeah, that's a lesson learned there. That sixth sense that some of us develop over time for, that seems sketchy. Those things help us catch it too, but it's imperfect. We'll never catch it all. So when that nurse, that doctor, that front desk person at the hospital clicks that incoming link in that email and introduces ransomware, it's social engineering that facilitated the delivery of the payload, right? So very rarely is the damage purely social engineering, but man, is it an excellent way to open the door for the rest. And if you are a hospital whose patient records have suddenly been encrypted, we're not just talking about you losing money because you couldn't treat a patient. We might very well, and again, this isn't hyperbole or possibility, this is confirmed, loss of life. When somebody comes in who's having a health event and I can't look for their information, I can't find out what's wrong with them. That puts them in peril and possibly costs them their health or worse yet, their life. And again, if that sounds like hyperbole, folks, if we go back and look at some of the earliest examples of social engineering facilitating major InfoSec outage and damage, we look no further than the very classic Stuxnet virus of the early 2000s, which was a sophisticated worm that did a lot of damage to Siemens centrifuges for the Iranians. But how did it get there? It was an air-gapped network. Well, as we'll talk about, the delivery mechanisms for getting those things there are varied, clever, and often extremely tailored. But it wasn't the worm that got the worm into the facility. It was a human being that carried it in. We'll talk about how that looks here coming up in just a little bit. But Stuxnet caused Iranian nuclear centrifuges to malfunction. Folks, that's physical damage to a fairly sensitive device, hardware, industrial control systems that, again, can cost not just money, but life, well-being, quality of existence, right? Like we're talking about real impact here that goes beyond the dollars. So all this to say that the real world impact is considerable and impact to organizations is demonstrably significant. But it's also the case that this goes beyond just business functionality and continuity of operations. This goes to fundamentally defending our well-being, our ability to function. Things like, being able to offset damage to global infrastructure, to utility-based infrastructure like water and power. So again, it usually starts with a social engineering attack. That's usually not what renders the most of the damage, but getting in the door is a heck of a lot easier when we're dealing with a human being than a firewall. So what then do the attackers, the perpetrators of such social engineering efforts tend to look like? Well, first off, we use mental shortcuts and hackers exploit those things. So let's talk about mental shortcuts. What do we mean by that? Cognitive bias, stereotype. Normally, we talk about those things as in a sort of pejorative sense, but I don't necessarily mean it that way. For example, the yellow car syndrome or effect, or as some people call it, which is just frequency bias, is when we're exposed to something and because we've seen it and it was novel or interesting, we suddenly think we're seeing more of it. That can work for us just like it can work against us, right? If you have a human being who has been inundated with security messaging, it's probably the case that they're going to see more security problems and probably be more predisposed, at least, to communicate what they think they see. If you see something, say something, please. But it also means that we can subtly, marketers are regularly involved in this. Advertisements rely on this, that if we are exposed enough to certain messaging, that it changes how we perceive things, it changes our expectations, and it changes what we want in some cases. So those kinds of cognitive biases, they're relying on that. They're also relying on people's sense of trying to be good and nice, right? If somebody is in peril, if somebody is in danger, most of us are inclined to help that person. And yet, if that puts us in danger or exposes us in some way to additional danger, then training people to stifle trying to be kind is a very fraught thing to do, right? Don't help people that are in need. That's not really the message we want to deliver. But at the same time, we want to hold any kind of assistance we provide in context, right? Can you come in and use my phone because your car broke down? Well, what's the context, right? Is it the middle of the night and I'm by myself and you look a little scary? Or is it broad daylight and you're looking to use my cell phone on the side of a downtown street, right? Context matters very much. So where and when is this messaging getting delivered? And what is the expectation of that impact against the potential victim here, right? So they know that we like this and don't like that. They know that many people are going to care a lot about trying to help a fellow person in trouble. There was a famous interview that was done a few years back on a BBC special where they were interviewing anonymously some hackers. And the hackers were talking in their male voices about how they hadn't had a lot of luck. They had youthful male voices. So when they would call to ask for things, they didn't get a lot of feedback there. But then what they changed was their voice to sound female and ultimately to put a crying baby on in the background. That elicited a sense of, oh, I want to help this person. This person's already struggling with the crying baby. Gosh, I've been there before. So let's get this person squared away to help them out. That is what they are preying upon. That's what they're counting on, that you are going to go, oh, gosh, yeah, this person could really use a hand. Maybe I'll just forego that normal set of processes, bypass that stuff to get them help, to get them out the door because they're in need. Just like marketers and advertisers also will say things like, this sale is going on for another 60 minutes. So you got to decide right now or you're not going to get the good deal, right? Just wait till Black Friday rolls around again to see all of the, this is the one time that you'll be able to get it at this price. And then watch them, raise it back up again the following week, and then it goes back down to the sale price it was at during Black Friday, right? But anyway, that notion of urgency, scarcity, you're going to run out of, you're not going to have time to. That often compels people to hurry up and make knee-jerk choices when otherwise a proper consideration would have rendered it, maybe we'll hold off on this, maybe we'll wait, maybe I'll call my immediate superior to find out if responding to this, helping you out, if that's okay. Social proof and authority. I am the boss you have never met. I am the owner you didn't know. And I am telling you, this is what I need, want, demand of you, so you acquiesce. And then, there's something to be said for likability. And this is something that I think anybody, whether you're in InfoSec, getting into InfoSec, all of us need to really grapple with the reality that the stereotype of the hacker in mom's basement is pretty tired and pretty inaccurate. And in fact, it potentially mischaracterizes the danger in a way that, oh yeah, well, I'll see that goober in the dark hoodie coming from a mile away who's trying to trick me into giving a password. Yeah, that's the thing. Good hackers are notoriously good with people. They're not hiding in a basement, right? Maybe you're certainly, you got your contingent of administrators that would prefer to be on the bottom floor and not deal with people all day. But good social engineering takes usually being good with humans. In fact, a lot of people that are good at this have a very high emotional intelligence. They're capable of picking up on nuance and shifts in a dynamic. They can see when somebody is starting to him and haw and maybe isn't totally comfortable with the way things are going. And they'll say things to disarm that. Like, I can see this is bugging you. Hey, you know what? I'll roll with the punch, man. I get it. I don't want to put you in any trouble and have you get, and often just acknowledging the nervousness is enough to disarm the nervousness in the person who's hearing it. Those kinds of techniques and methods, those take a certain amount of emotional intelligence, and the people who are really good at it, who are also willing to ignore, morality and ethics, they can do a lot of damage really quickly by simply lulling you into a sense that it's okay. Nothing bad's going to happen here. We're all friends. We're all in the same boat. So as much as, and by the way, it doesn't matter how many years you've been in InfoSec, how many times you've dodged bullets for your company and drug them out of an incident or successfully recovered from a disaster. We are all in need of paying attention to this problem because all of us are human beings and all of us have bias. We operate from stereotype and we can be manipulated. And we're a heck of a lot easier to manipulate than firewalls and intrusion prevention systems and data leak loss prevention. So we have to, one, try to proactively stop this from occurring and then reactively identify when it has occurred by knowing what it looks like. Well, humans operating as the weakest link in the security chain regularly are going to be preyed upon based on their desire to help, or the pressure of the time, or the fear that that authority figure is going to get them in trouble, or authority bias. We obey authority figures all the time. All right. You might have heard the language of Hippo. All right. Highest paid person's opinion. Sometimes it's, well, they're up the rung. They have greater authority than I do. They're higher from a responsibility and roles perspective. They have greater clout. So of course I'm going to consider what they say and possibly even operate from that. But again, just because that's the highest paid person or they're the one with C in their title doesn't necessarily mean the choice they're making or the recommendation they're providing is proper. And it sure as heck shouldn't be the case that if seemingly someone with authority is asking me to do something that is at odds with our security posture, that warrants a response. Now, I will say one of the biggest dangers isn't that a human being wouldn't tell you that, but rather that you have not constructed a culture that would invite that feedback. Because if I'm worried you're going to throw me under the bus if we find a problem, I'm not going to talk about this. I don't want to talk about this. It puts me in danger. Now I'm not making enough money to send my kid to college next year. So I'm not going to say anything because we have a blaming culture instead of a learning culture. And that's a big part of addressing the human weakness. The components that are taken advantage of are often going to lead humans to making mistakes. And if they are so worried that that mistake being identified is going to translate to putting their job in peril or worse, all right, maybe getting blackballed in the industry. Hey, this person doesn't know what they're talking about. I'm never going to get hired again. Or even if that's not true, but you can make them believe it might be. All right. These are the kinds of things that get people to quiet down, to zip their lip, and to basically protect themselves in a silo in the event that they think they've seen something problematic or dangerous. That includes, oops, I clicked on something I shouldn't have, or I think I told that person more than I should have, or that social media conversation I had last night. Yeah, maybe I said more than I should have. Maybe I shared more about this forthcoming job that's going to become available with that person on LinkedIn than maybe was wise. So those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure people are able to say, hey, look, I screwed up. I made a mistake. Let's figure out how to mitigate the damage. Now, I don't mean to suggest that you never hold people accountable for their mistakes, right? There is a balance between these two extremes. But if we don't create that balance, we're very likely going to lean accidentally, if nothing else, into the blame space. And when you're in that blame space, people shut down, they're not talking. And now you've taken your weakest link and you've made it worse. Because not only are they being tricked, but they're being tricked and they're not willing to tell you when they've made mistakes because they're afraid of reprisal. They're afraid of what people are going to do in response. So What we're looking to do is to identify what makes a human being vulnerable and exploit it. So we've already basically said all of these things. So once again, urgency, fear, curiosity, though. We haven't really mentioned that, but sometimes see who viewed your profile. You ever see that? Oh, see who viewed your profile. I want to know who's watching me, who's looking for me. Maybe I'm a hot commodity and somebody's going to hire me, right? So our desire to know something can overwhelm our security awareness. Greed is another one. All right. I want the money. You want a free iPhone. You get an extra bonus if you do XYZ. In some cases, greed is more of a circumstance we've been placed in, right? Maybe you've had a financially devastating circumstance that has caused a problem, and now suddenly doing illegal or problematic things looks like the only way out. Well, that is a shift in your insider's mentality, and it can obviously lead to a resultant impact for your organization if they decide to sell the latest blueprints and the widgets to the nearest competitor. But again, I want to address another, I don't know if I would call it emotional or not, but I definitely would say it is centered around the reality of human beings being emotional. And that is what I mentioned before, security theater. The idea that we do things that make us feel safe. This is a kind of social engineering, although sometimes it's the social engineering of the information security team that we are utilizing to defend ourselves are also perpetrating some elements of social engineering. Hey, everybody, look at how secure we are because we're doing this and this and this. So I sometimes call that reverse social engineering, where we're accidentally social engineering ourselves. But that's a reality here too. Talking ourselves into, hey, look at all the great work we've done. Look at all the secure things that we're doing. Well, is there any evidence they're working? Because it's great to do things that are ostensibly secure, but without proof that they're actually doing us any good, it really doesn't go very far. Now, getting a little bit more specific, what are some ways that you're actually going to see social engineering attacks manifest? Probably the most pervasive, common, and well-known would be a phishing threat. That's PH phishing. And phishing is the idea that I could basically send a whole bunch of emails in hopes that somebody sees it and gets tricked into doing whatever the email compels them to do. Click on this link, share this information. You've been selected to go on a new Carnival cruise. All you got to do is give us your social security number. Spear phishing, comparatively, is a more narrow attack in that it is looking specifically at a particular organization. So rather than going after anybody that might respond to the email, spear phishing narrows that scope to a particular organization. So I might be going after Acme Corp, and I'm sending the emails to just Acme Corp. So I might get even more creative. I might cater the specific attack to them. That can include things like slapping on corporate logos and making things look official. Now, a really targeted narrow scope is going after usually the C level, your executive or senior management officers, possibly even members of the board of directors. This whaling approach, going for the whale, right? The white whale, the biggest at the organization, would arguably also often warrant, from the attacker's perspective, the greatest fruits of that labor. Because where are we going to get some of the best and most meaningful information to exfiltrate, if not from some of the most powerful people that represent that organization? Clone phishing is duplicating legitimate communications with tiny malicious changes. Now, this can be as the result of an on-point attack, getting between two people that are communicating and manipulating the conversation in transit, or it could be that you intercept communication and then alter it and then forward it along as though it's the original message was coming from you. So there are lots of different ways to go about this, and you'll notice that this is still requiring technology as a delivery system. This is the means by which we communicate the manipulation, but the manipulation is still very much targeting humans. Now, some good signs that you're getting hit with a phishing email is that it's got the corporate logo and a whole bunch of misspellings. Now, that's not to say you don't necessarily have coworkers that are not necessarily enthusiastic about their grammar, but Short of something like, the occasional misspelling or the incorrect use of a word, if you're seeing what appears to be broken English, rampant misspelling, strange structure to the actual, like there's weird line breaks where they don't really belong, that's a pretty good sign you're dealing with somebody that's just kind of throwing stuff out there to see who they can trick. All right, mismatched URLs. Don't assume that just because that's a PayPal logo and if you click on it, it ostensibly takes you to PayPal, that you actually got taken to PayPal, right? You might have gotten taken to PlayPal or something that actually clones the URL in your browser if the infection, if the malware is deep enough. And it could even make it appear as though you are on the website that you believe you are on, even in the URL. So you always want to validate the actual specific URL that you've been taken to. And sometimes, folks, all it takes is 1 or 2 characters in that URL to send you somewhere dangerous. So this is not necessarily something you can easily just glance at and discern, but especially as a method of going back and identifying prior attacks or manipulations, sometimes you'll find, oh, the URL that was resolved here looked like it was going to PayPal, but it was going to PlayPal instead, right? Urgency and threats, again, things that pop up on a computer and tell you about dangers are usually helping you find dangers and stopping them. But the problem is, if malware has infected successfully, then the malware having infected your system already is then scaring you with social engineering communication. This is pretty typical of spyware. It gets on your computer. It's not as popular as it once was, but I'm sure some of you remember the days of there being this weird thing that kind of looked like the Windows Security Center. But if you knew what the Security Center looked like, you'd go, that looks close, but that's not it. And the wording's a little strange. And yeah, what it would do is say, we've scanned your computer and we've found 10,000 viruses. And if you don't get rid of them, everything's going to be terrible and no one will ever like you again. So, oh my gosh, I got to hurry up and get rid of all of that, right? Because it's dangerous and this program has so kindly found it for me. And of course, it is the infection, not that it has found an infection for you. So we have to know what legitimate software is supposed to be installed on our systems to know that the messaging and the pop-ups that we get are not in fact nefarious. That is a very difficult lesson to teach because professionals are still grappling with that all the time because the software changes all the time. The websites change all the time. So is this a message from a legitimate source is kind of difficult to discern all the time. So one of the things that we have to do is in organizations standardize what is normal and then teach people what normal is so that their alarm bells go off when they see something that departs from that significantly. Now, email is email, and that comes in and we can blast out as much of that as we want on demand. But vishing or VoIP phishing is considerably more targeted and specific in that it's going phone call, phone call, phone call. Now, don't get me wrong. It's not like there's usually a person sitting and dialing the numbers. This is usually some kind of auto dialer. That's not exactly new technology. Heck, the movie War Games with Matthew Broderick in the 80s was using auto dialing. War dialing is the actual term there. And so this kind of combines war dialing, dialing number after number, usually arbitrarily off some list, until you get someone that picks up. And then usually VoIP will kick in with a, hey, did you know? Here's the problem that you didn't realize. Now with the advent of real-time voice-enabled AI, it can understand and respond to you and sound very sincere and very human. The Turing test has been destroyed 10 times over, folks. It's very easy to be talking to a computer and not even know it, right? And that's only going to improve. That's going to worsen with time. So these phone calls aren't necessarily even a human talking to you anymore. It's often an auto dialer that sends an automated message. Your car's warranty, your credit card's expired. We're the IRS. That's the new big scare. Well, not new, but newer big scary one because, oh my gosh, I'm in trouble with the government. That's a big deal, right? I'm gonna have to get lawyers involved and this could ruin my life. So they're again, scaring people into action by stating something that any one of us would potentially have reason to be concerned by. And then there are positive VoIP phishing attacks like, hey, you've won the cruise, just like what you would get in the phishing emails. To a lesser extent, we also see this over text messages. Skype had notoriously big problems with this for a while, where you would just get inundated with a bunch of nonsense messages from random fake Skype users. This is also still pretty problematic in the world of Telegram, right? Telegram will also inundate you with a bunch of messages if you haven't filtered out the I only want to talk to people that I know in some cases. And I'm sure that some of you on occasion have gotten the new scam is, hey, I got one 2 days ago. Hey, are we on for our yoga lessons? Now, I realize we've not met in person, but I am not a yoga instructor, and I have a feeling you could figure that out if we had met in person briefly. And this particular person clearly was just trying to set up a pretense for communicating with a random person to see if they could strike up a conversation. Most of these things are automated. There's some AI on the back end that kind of knows how to cater to and respond to whatever is said. No, sorry, you have the wrong number. Oh my gosh. Well, I just can't believe I've made this silly mistake, but you seem great. Tell me more about you, right? And now look, if you are a person who doesn't know this kind of attack is coming or likely, especially for folks, often elderly folks that did not grow up with or have a lot of this technology in their life, they often get targeted by these attacks. Again, not because they're not capable of understanding it, but because they didn't live with it, they didn't grow up with it, this isn't a part of their world. So understandably, these manipulations are new and novel and not expected. And, the scariest ones, I just had a good friend of mine 2 days ago. Again, these are far too common. Hey, if you get a phone call about me having been in a car accident, I'm fine. It wasn't me, but it's going to sound like me because someone has cloned my voice and is calling and asking for money. So again, gang, it's not just phone and email, even text messages that compel us to respond with some kind of, hey, either this is a text message for paying an invoice, this is a text message to respond over an appointment, or this is a text message that came from a random wrong person, but gosh, meet cute. What an opportunity for us to become new BFFs, right? So a lot of this is predicated on some kind of pretext that I'm the worker that's showing up with the official looking logo on my polo to fix your copier, right? Or my gosh, I really thought that you guys were going to have my account ready. What do you mean? What account? We don't even have you in the system. Oh no, can it? Right? So a lot of that kind of thing. Or a phone call asking for information that worries you, like, hey, you were supposed to have this report to me yesterday and you didn't. I need you to get it over to me now. You know what? Let's just use this other email because I'm home and I'm going to be out of town. And that urgency, that concern, right? Wire transfer requests. Hey, you got to get this paid. You're going to go to collections if you don't get this paid. Now, those tend to be in-your-face conversations, okay? But what about baiting you to do something dangerous in addition to? USB baiting attacks are extremely common. And earlier, I mentioned the story of Stuxnet, which is kind of the quintessential example of worms and baiting attacks, social engineering delivery, and the terrifying reality of industrial control systems getting hacked. But it begins, like so many good attacks and hacks, with some kind of social engineering attack. Why would I try to infiltrate an air-gapped network, Mission Impossible Tom Cruise style, when I could just infect a bunch of USB sticks, just kind of spread them out in the parking lot outside a little bit, right? And wait till somebody curiously carries it inside and goes, well, I wonder what's on this free USB stick I just discovered. Another kind of online equivalent of a baiting attack would be free downloads bundled with a bunch of problematic software that you didn't want, like potentially unwanted programs, adware, spyware, worse yet. And so again, rarely is it the entire attack, but it's so common that this is what gets you in the door. Media lures, promises of free movies or music, and sometimes they make good on that. This is kind of a social engineering baiting meets Trojan, right? Because we're going to trick you into doing something by giving you a thing you want. Here's a CD of my music, and it plays music. And it delivers some malware too. And like we said, you won the Carnival Cruise, you won the cash prize, also compels a lot of reaction, right? Did I really? If so, I'd better take advantage of that. And sometimes social engineering shows up in the physical world, right? If I follow you through an entrance, or for that matter, you kindly hold a door for me, we would call that versions of tailgating, or piggybacking. Different vendors define those slightly differently, but the idea is rooted in the same space. A door is being opened and I'm able to go through it when I shouldn't. Impersonation, again, tending to be somebody you're not. IT support, the copy repair person from another company you've never met. Shoulder surfing is looking over your shoulder, discerning whether or not there are secrets that I can take just by looking at what you're doing. This can only be mitigated with people being situationally aware and some other stuff like maybe putting a privacy filter on a screen. It can also be mitigated with some clean desk policies, like don't leave stuff on your desk and don't leave your computer unlocked when you walk away. Going through garbage, sadly, this is still a thing that happens, and sadly, adjacent to that would be that people sometimes die pretty gruesome deaths digging through garbage. So again, there are a number of stories out there about social engineers searching through garbage to try to find details that ended up losing their lives to it. Nonetheless, digging through someone's garbage can reveal a tremendous amount about who they are, what they do, what they care about. And again, physical baiting like we just looked at in the prior slide. The Twitter VIP hack is a real example of a real world scenario of social engineering. Attackers called Twitter employees claiming to be IT. The credentials were then stolen because they were directed to a fake VPN page where they logged in with the fake VPN credentials. And the attackers gained access to the internal tools through the VPN, which is a very, very common approach. In fact, folks, it's so common that there are actually out there on the dark web entities called initial access brokers that sell VPN credentials, remote desktop credentials, VNC and SSH stuff. And you just, highest bidder gets to decide whether or not they can get in your front door because somebody disclosed the credentials. So this is very common, kind of similar to the hack against Target back in 2013, where their HVAC vendors had their credentials stolen through social engineering. So similar process, then we get access, right? We get the credentials, then we exploit what we've now learned. They hijacked 130 high-profile accounts, including at the time President Obama, Elon Musk, and employees out at Apple. Bitcoin scam tweets netted over $120,000. So a lot of profoundly damaging, powerful attacks are levied from a, hey, you're supposed to do this, or you better hurry up end, or you're afraid to, or you're going to win if you do. So motivating people through money, financial motivation is probably the most beneficial way to get people to respond in circumstances where they shouldn't. Corporate espionage is about a fifth of the problem. 5%, which is relatively low, and I would say, pardon the challenge, but a little unclear on whether or not 5% isn't low. Nation state actors and APTs are regularly, and as a point of that's their job. So that's something they do all day, every day, right? Your advanced persistent threats are very capable because they're advanced. They're persistent because this is their job. They don't do this on the weekends or for fun. This is all they do. And they're a threat because they're really good at what they do because they're advanced, persistent, and funded usually by a nation state or some kind of large criminal conglomerate. So I think 5% is probably a little bit low, but I digress. Activism, people that are politically motivated by some kind of belief system, moral code, religious belief, etc. And so again, going after people based on that. Manipulating people based on that is also something that you can click into, right? Politics, religion, these have deep roots in emotional reactions. So they are also good ways to get people to respond. So this brings us to, hopefully, something can be done about it, but what does that look like? First off, absolutely everything that comes to you comes from somebody that you believe you trust. There must be some reason that you believe what you're looking at, being told to do, reading. There must be some reason, independent of you hoping it's correct, that you believe it to be correct. And so that looks like, where did it come from? Is it really the case that it came from there, or did somebody spoof or manipulate it? All right. Use official channels. Don't use out-of-band methods to communicate things, right? If there are official channels for communication, maintain those official channels so that nobody accidentally becomes a part of that communication, or for that matter, sneaks in to that communication to hear things that aren't intended for them. Right? Independent verification. It's not a bad idea to bring a third party into the world who, again, you always have to have the conversation. Well, how do I trust the third party? Well, that does go to a certain amount of due diligence being necessary, but otherwise, sure, you can definitely get to the point where you can establish relationships with third party escrow services, audit companies, etc., that can help reflect upon the things that you have done or are doing to ensure that they're the best version, the most cost-effective version of what you might be able to do. So bringing in a third party to scan, log, as well as proactively help you defend and maybe even train. Don't deviate wildly from the way that your organization has said to do things. Strong authentication, not, well, but it's really inconvenient to have a password over here. Embrace the inconvenience. Unless it is not cost effective to do so, or it falls within your acceptable ranges of risk, you shouldn't be making any changes to whether or not protections are in play. Most of the time, with very few exceptions, authentication is a must. Practice healthy skepticism, okay? Hey, this seems to be coming at a weird time or from a weird place or from an email address I've never seen before. That's probably a good reason to not trust it at all, right? Limit information sharing. It really it's kind of a good rule in life, right? Less is more. Say less, do less, unless you are compelled. I'm not saying don't go be proactive and do cool, wonderful things in life. But when it comes to the sharing and dissemination of information, less is more. A little bit of information to start the conversation. If they need more information, there's a pretty good chance they're going to tell you that, right? I'm sorry, that's not enough for me to act. Oh, well, then I can volunteer some other details. But starting with too much, starting with more than is necessary, is risk without reward. Keep systems updated. This is a gimme, right? Make sure that systems don't have the most standard common vulnerabilities exposed that would potentially facilitate an easier social engineering attack. But frankly, of all the things that you can do, my third defense strategy for you is probably the most important, which is to get people questioning, asking questions, relaying information, become detectives of sorts, right? Because they are one of your most powerful and beneficial detective tools. So they're going to question everything because you trained them to. They aren't going to knee jerk. They're not going to let some immediate, oh my gosh, if you don't do this, if you don't hurry up, we're going to get fired. It's all going to burn down. You can't completely remove urgency because some urgency is organic, but inorganic urgency, not having to hurry up and make choices, not creating anxious environments where people are more likely to act out of fear. Remember, folks, we're still biological humans. And if your rational brain is being eclipsed by your limbic system and you're in a fight, flight, freeze, fawn response, you're not making reasoned choices anymore. You're just trying to not die. And so we have to help people stay calm enough and stay focused and reasoned enough that they act reasonably, even when there is an escalated situation, maybe even a disaster. And of course, threat intelligence, vulnerability intelligence, staying abreast of the latest things that are happening out there in the world is mission critical to this process. There's no scenario where you can get away from that entirely. It's also important that we be able to consult with others. What do third parties have to say about this situation? Are the folks in the healthcare industry seeing a sudden new surge of a certain type of ransomware? Well, remaining informed, which is partially threat and vulnerability intelligence, but also rubbing elbows with other professionals in both similar and potentially different areas to have a wider scope of information, as well as a network of like-minded professionals that you can share information with and that can potentially share information with you. Join local chapters, get on some Discord sites. There's some great forums out there. Listen to relevant podcasts and join those tech communities. You know, I absolutely love Security Now with Steve Gibson and Leo Laporte. Comes out every Tuesday. Not to mention, you can get some continuing ed credits just by listening to that 2-hour podcast every week for certain vendors like ISE Squared. So, is it worth remaining connected and knowing what's going on? Yup. The number one thing you've got to do is be able to recognize a problem. Because if you don't recognize problems when they happen, you can't do any of the other things. So this has to be number one. Recognize. Know when an attack is happening. Then most incident response requires that we isolate and communicate what happened and get back to normal. Social engineering really shows up mostly at the beginning and end of this conversation. At the beginning of incident response, we're in a prepare and detect state, right? We want to be able to plan to see problems and then have the means to see problems and communicate it efficiently. So that recognition must be the case. Now, the rest of these are really more incident response steps that one would respond to after a detected instance of social engineering, vulnerability exploit, etc. So yeah, at that point, we would contain and then we would eradicate the underlying problem. We would have to let people know. But then on the far end of that, recover, followed by some version of like a lessons learned conversation, would be, had we communicated enough? Have we had enough conversations about what's going on in this space that people were meaningfully prepared for the discussion that occurred? Okay. So at the beginning, we want to prime people to see it and detect it. At the end, we want to learn why that maybe wasn't enough, or what new version of social engineering was being thrown at us. What fresh hell have we discovered now that potentially has the capacity to do harm like this and worse down the road? In particular, as we saw, there is a dedicated term just for trying to hack the upper rung of your organization. So whaling, as we talked about before with phishing attacks. Executive protection is protecting the highest targets with usually the most to lose and the most valuable assets to glean by going after them. So exactly what you would expect, all of the normal steps we would take, but probably with some added fervor and potential reinforcements. Don't forget about good old defense in depth. We don't want to get myopic in our response to protecting executives. They need a lot of communication. They have to be aware of what's happening. Situational awareness training is good for them. Are you aware? Are you always walking to the coffee shop the same way every day? Did you notice that white van that's been parked out in front of our facility for a week that wasn't ever there before? Those are the kinds of things that often proactively help executives not get socially engineered. They have to be hyper vigilant because they are so likely to be targeted by these circumstances. So stricter protocols, what we would generally refer to as more of a privileged account and access management approach to higher and more sensitive accounts and knowledge bases, that's warranted, right? We got to do more. Right? Just popping here to the end, last slide here before I get to some Q&A. Future threats. As I started to mention previously, AI is changing the game because AI has created an unprecedented shift in our human ability to detect things that are fraudulent. It's getting better and better that a message, a video, a picture that previously would have been, oh, that was photoshopped, and there would be a lot of elements in it that would make it very obvious. That's becoming harder and harder to discover. More specialization, more forensic tools are being required to say, that's not actually the original audio, that was created instead. We can make people sound how we want. We can make people look how we want electronically. So AI generated content, and don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan, does a lot of cool things. But like most powerful technologies, it has a lot of potential positive and negative benefit alike. Deep fakes aren't going anywhere. They're just going to get better. People's trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And again, this is something we can demonstrate through polling and feedback. People don't trust governments, medical institutions, businesses as they once did. So they gravitate towards sources of information that feel sincere, which means that they are often consuming information that is deliberate disinformation, often through social media, or at least misinformation, which is just wrong, even though it wasn't deliberately wrong. And because our trust in larger institutions that are faceless, big, and often feel like they don't have our interests at heart, it's a lot easier to embrace things that are easier for us to understand, easier for us to acquire, and are often incorrect. So being able to communicate that this is a system, this is an entity, this is an authority you should trust, that's more complicated than it used to be. And it's arguably the case that it will continue to be. All the more reason for us to be powerful security evangelists in the space of our local organizations, especially if you represent information security management. You have to not just talk the talk, but walk the walk and bring other people into that discussion every day in some way. Also, again, I would say more than anything, cross-platform attacks across different channels that can now be coordinated, right? It's one thing if you get a weird email. It's another thing if you got a phone call and an email and it was about the same thing. That has a tendency to legitimize the attack, and especially if it's being targeted at you. Really genuine, really sincere looking things like, well, this is official corporate letterhead. Maybe even you get a physical letter in the mail, right? To correlate with all these other communications or recommendations that you're getting. Those things will legitimize in our minds much more quickly than a one-off email or text message. And that's getting a lot easier to do. So while I've always said that any good security training should lead you feeling a little bit more scared about the world around you, there are things to be done. First, you've probably heard of the concept of zero trust. And zero trust is a good starting point for social engineering in that it tells us, don't trust anything, verify everything. So although we don't want to allow it to cripple us from a productivity perspective, we should expect, whether it's a home network or a giant corporate network spread across the globe, there's probably something compromised about it. Probably some amount of data has been stolen we don't know, and some item, asset, or service is compromised in a fashion we're not aware of. So slow down. Urgency is often what drives poor decision-making, not because it's actually urgent. All right? I call this manufactured urgency. Manufactured urgency, happens all the time, right? We got to hurry up and do this thing. Do we? Is it really important that it happens in this order at this time? Sometimes we impose manufactured urgency on ourselves. I got to hurry up and get this done. Do I really need to hurry up and get it done, though? And that causes us to make knee-jerk choices that are probably not the most reasonable. Invite communication. And that looks like a willingness to say, I made a mistake, I saw a problem, and I am confident I'm not just going to get thrown under the bus at the first sign of an issue. Who can we blame for this? Shouldn't be an organization's initial response to a problem, right? Rather, why did this happen? What are the ramifications of it? What should we do about it? And maybe what should we do differently moving into the future? And of course, folks, you've got to keep your head above water. The world is complicated and constantly changing, and information security might be one of the most egregious changers of them all, right? They're constantly doing something different, new technology, a new exploit, a new way to do something, and all of that equals added complexity, added abstraction, and a lot bigger platforms that can do a lot more damage, a lot more efficiently. All the more reason for us to remain connected to the world around us, to remember that a silo is a deeply dangerous way to handle things. Well, gang, that takes me to the end of what I had to say, and I just wanted to invite 5 or so minutes of any Q&A. Anybody got any questions, any concerns about how this has shown up in your world? Maybe something that has happened to you personally maybe something that you're seeing as a trend or concern within your organization. It's on your mind. Well, folks, I'm going to hang back for just a few minutes in case there are any one-off conversations or any one-on-one discussions you'd like to have with me. A note that this webinar is recorded, and so you can go back and reference it at a later time should you care to. Great question. So I got a question about phishing sims. Talk about why phishing sims as a training technique is both important and inadequate. It's important that it be there because the most common way that people get socially engineered in enterprises is typically phishing. So are phishing simulations effective, as in sending out fake phishing emails to see if your employees click on them and then have some kind of response if they do? Well, the response needs to be something meaningful. And this is often where phishing sims fall short, right? So they try to make people, oh man, I'm not going to click on links anymore because if I do, then I go take this quiz that a fifth grader could pass, right? And that's the problem. If it's just punitive, then eventually it creates an adversarial relationship between your information security team and the people trying to get their job done. And if that's it, if that's the perception, then you're not getting what the phishing sim and the phishing campaign was designed to do. That anti-phishing campaign, I should say anti-phishing campaign, is designed to say, hey, if you click on links, we want to teach you why that could have been a really big problem that resulted in a really big impact. But if all you do is put them in front of a click quiz, that's not probably going to reinforce it, and it may even generate some animosity. So long as you're pairing phishing sims, anti-phishing sims, with other training and reinforcing your messaging in a way that humanizes it and doesn't turn it into just a punitive response to a mistake, then I'd say it's a very, very important facet in an overarching security awareness strategy. Great question. Anything else? Like I said, folks, I'm going to stick around. There will be a recording of this webinar for you to go back and reference at a later time. We greatly appreciate you hanging out with us today, but we are going to go ahead and call it there. So like I say, feel free to hang back, ask questions if you have any of them. Otherwise, thanks for popping in. And again, folks, my sincerest apology for the 30-minute delay, and I greatly appreciate everybody's patience and kindness in response to that. Thanks again, folks, and we'll see you next time at training camp. Be well.